चलो 1-2 मिनट और वेट करते हैं, लेट्स सी, होपफुली आ जाएं सब लोग जल्दी से। वेलकम स्टूडेंट्स, जल्दी जल्दी बुलाओ सब लोगों को, वी हैव टू स्टार्ट। नाइस। So good afternoon everyone, and welcome back to our rock slope technology class. We have reached the milestone of 10 classes. Congratulations. Today is our 10th class, so we are continuing what we started yesterday. We are discussing about the various aspects of geology which actually affect the slope stability. So we were discussing about what kind of geological disturbances are there, what kind of discontinuities are there that are present in general rock types. We got some basic idea of how they are formed. Now, what are the stresses? What are the kind of stresses that are present during and after the formation of rock that actually dictate how and what kind of discontinuity will a rock have. We also saw how different kinds of discontinuities uh, can behave differently, like different difference between a fault, a joint, and how they behave, right? So we saw that. Then we moved on to what are the properties of a joint. We saw what are the different properties and how they are basically affecting in simple way how they are affecting the type of slope stability issues that can be there. Today we will be continuing there. We will be moving ahead from that, and today we will be also discussing some properties of how to plot these discontinuities. When we go to a geological survey, or when we do a geological survey for our mines or our slopes that are there in civil construction, or we have other natural slopes that are there, we basically have to consider many factors, and one of the factors, as we know, is obviously the slope angle, or what kind of slope is there. Apart from that, we also have to see what are the orientation of these joints, what is the characteristic of these joints, like what is its depth, how highly inclined or low inclined it is, and so what are the parameters that can actually help us understand what a joint actually looks like. Unless and until we do that, we don't know how it will behave physically, right? So there are methods that geologists basically go and map these joints. So it's not possible because it's not possible to map all the joints in a three-dimensional modeling sort of, because there are, first of all, there are so many joints and there are so many joint sets that are there, and apart from joint there are other discontinuities. And if we want to get a whole picture of that area, it will be quite difficult if we go just for the three-dimensional plotting. So there has to be a way in which a three-dimensional joint can be actually captured into a two-dimensional projection sort of. So that is called a stereographic projection or the stereographic analysis. So we will be doing that today. So we'll be understanding how it is and what all it involves a little bit. So let's do that, and if time permits, we'll also see how we do some mapping, or when we try to plot joints, how they are plotted inside, and planes, how they're plotted inside. When we have the idea of how the planes and the joints are mapped in a three-dimensional way, we can actually find the dynamics of the interaction of these joints, these just discontinuities and all. And based on the interaction that they have with the slope and with each other, the further analysis can actually give us what kind of failure can happen. Suppose a plane is there that is very much parallel to the slope. So if the characteristics are favorable for that scenario, they can lead to a planar failure. But if there are two planes that are inclined with one another, they are forming a wedge, and that wedge also interacts with the slope. So that can be a wedge failure. There can be many more types of failure based on what kind of arrangement the joints are there. So that kind of understanding of arrangement of joints and the arrangement of planes with respect to each other, that we will also be seeing how these can be done. So in next couple of lectures, we will be seeing something called a kinematic analysis. So kinematic analysis basically is the dynamic analysis of joints and joint interactions with the slope. So that can actually help us predict the nature of the failure that can happen in these scenarios. Now do remember all these analysis, as we will be discussing when we go ahead also, that all these analysis when we are doing, they are based on certain parameters of a discontinuity, like the discontinuity mapping that we'll be doing, the stereographic analysis, that will be based on the orientation or the depth or the angle of the joint, how it is oriented. And as we were seeing and yesterday also, that it is not the only characteristic that defines slope failure, but it is an important characteristic, and it actually gives us an idea of what kind of slope failure can happen. Right? So that ways we have to know the what indication we get from any study, and also what is the limitation of each study. So be mindful of what we learn and what we can do and cannot do with anything. Anyways, let's start that. So I think yesterday we already saw what are the joint properties: is spacing, aperture, persistence, roughness, infilling, orientation. And we wanted to talk about something about a dip angle, dip direction, and strike. So we will be talking about that today. So effect of orientation, that we have already seen, I think, yeah. And we also saw some examples of if even the orientations are same for the joints, they can have different behaviors based on what kind of other properties are there, such as the joint's persistence or the joint spacing. So both many of the other parameters are especially critical to decide which kind of failure happens. So this I think we have covered already. Now moving on, we will move on ahead and see how these joints can actually be mapped and what are the orientation characteristics of a joint. So quantification of joint orientation. So using the uh, a certain set of parameters like strike, dip, dip direction, and some other things, we can actually plot a plot a representative plane that represents what kind of joint and its orientation are. So I think based on your previous study, you might be knowing the strike, dip, and dip direction, but still, just to give you some idea, the movement of the plane along the surface or along any outcrop maybe that basically tells us how the plane is moving. That direction gives us the strike direction, right? The here strike. Dip is the actual dip from the horizontal. That is the dip. That is we generally denote by xi, and that gives us how much the plane is the slope of the plane is with respect to horizontal, right? Dip direction gives us the direction of the dip. Now, uh, this there are few more things: trend and plunge. Anyone has any idea what these are? Trend and plunge. Ever heard of these? तो कहाँ गया plunge? Anyone? चलो आगे I will come reach that ahead. Trend and plunge is very similar to what we refer as a strike and dip, but that is not for plane. That is for plotting a line. We'll see how it is done later. So in dip also there is a true dip and there is an apparent dip, right? Any angle that is the maximum, that gives the maximum dip to with respect to horizontal, actually is termed as a true dip uh, for the discontinuity or the plane or anything. Now tell me one thing. I have two questions. Maybe let's put it there. Yeah. How can, if you go into a field and you find a plane like this, you don't have any it's a big plane, it may be a big slope, and you may not have very specific instruments to measure how exactly the plane. Is there any way to find a true dip if you go into the field and you just have rudimentary scales and measures, that's it? Any idea how to find a true dip in the field? Some practical ways, some ingenious ways anyone can suggest? Yeah, raise hands. No hands. क्या हो गया भाई, आज खाना नहीं खाया क्या किसी ने? How will you find a true dip if you go into the field and see a plane? अगर plane है and it's not easy to understand अगर ये true dip पे है कि apparent dip, whatever the slope we are seeing, right? किसी को कोई idea how to find the true dip? Any practical ways, any practical way we can find out? Yes, Swati.
Sir, seeing the plane direction, that is how the plane is there, we can measure it. Or by if we have some flowing material, if we put on the geological plane, it will show us the dip direction maybe.
It is a good idea, and the best thing we can do there is similar to that. If we have something like a rock or some water or a fluid that can flow, the direction that it takes, if you put it from the top, will be actually the true tip direction, right? Because that's the natural way to fall. So is the geologists also have similar equipments, something called a ball bob. They basically have a threaded ball that they can throw, just put it on the slope and they can see where it goes. And that also gives a true dip. They have certain compass and all the instruments as well. But very practically, if someone wants to understand how whether what I am seeing for a slope is a true dip or an apparent dip, is just to flow some water or throw some rock or a small pebble that whatever natural direction it takes, the natural direction will be the direction of the true dip, because that's the, unless it is obstructed by some other plane or some other obstacle, the natural direction it will take in the plane is true dip. So that's an easy way to do it. That's right, Swati. Now this statement, we say angle between true dip and the strike is always 90 degree. Is it true? Anyone? I want to find out if that is true. That will give us some measures that we can take. So the true dip is always at a 90-degree angle with the strike. What do you guys say? Anyone? Is it true that a statement that is written here? If not, why? If yes, why? जगह है, जगो, सब लोग जगो भाई, ज्यादा खाना खा लिया. Who all are here? Let me.
Sir, it's true, sir.
It's true always.
Yes, sir.
Nitesh.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Anyone says it is false? Any idea? Any way it can not be true?
Hello.
Yes. Indrajit.
Yes, sir. On a map, it can be always perpendicular, but in real situations, it might be some undulations.
That way it is there. If geometry wise, if perfection is not there, that can be a case. But yes, in general sense, the strike is actually defined in that way that whatever the perpendicular to the true dip is, that will be the direction of a strike. And that's important to know, because if you see now, uh, if a strike and the direction of the true dip is at 90-degree angle, we can actually give uh, the define the plane orientation just by two numbers, just by the angle of the strike from the north, that is something like this angle between the north and the strike, right? If this is north, this angle is the strike angle, right? And the xi angle. If we have these two angles, I think these are sufficient to basically define any plane, because we anyways know what is the dip direction. But there is a catch in this that we'll discuss later. That may not be always the case. Let's move ahead. Uh, so we saw what are the true dips and apparent dip. That is quite clear. This is the maximum angle that a plane can subtend towards the dipping direction. If there is an apparent direction, there can be this angle will be less than xi, right? And that can be a uh, apparent dip direction that may be visible to us if we are having a different perspective. And generally it also happens in fields, because the cross section of the plane that we see might not be in the direction of the true dip. It might be in the direction of apparent dip. And that direction of apparent dip, we have to make sure that what we are recording is not the apparent dip, but the true dip. So sometimes these kind of measures are taken. Sometimes even the practical measure of flowing water is taken, where the water is going, and that also helps. So yes, both of these, the statement that are made here is true, and that will actually help us in defining how we basically show the orientation of a plane. Before moving ahead of the plane, we also want to show how we plot a line. So a line also can be given by two angles, right? If it has a center at certain point, uh, a horizontal angle and a vertical angle can actually define the line's orientation, right? So the same concept as we had for the strike and dip, we have this for the trend and plunge, but right now here the trend will be its angle from the north, and the plunge will be its angle with respect to horizontal. That is that we have to remember, because unlike the dip, unlike the strike is basically what angle we see from the north. That is actually the perpendicular to the dip direction. So the dip direction may be similar to trend. So I will actually have to cut this off. So trend is basically similar to dip direction, which is with the angle subtended for the line with respect to north, and from the horizontal to the dip to the line is the plunge. So trend and plunge are terms that we use to basically define on the line, sort of, when we plot the line. So why we plot lines in geology? Now, many times what happens is it's not just the planes or the discontinuities that are in form of planes. They can intersect each other to form, when two planes will intersect, they will form a line. And any such interaction, we also want to basically map it out and see where these are and how these are relevant. If uh, if a if a joint is running throughout the inside of the rock, and it's one part of the joint we see outcropping on the slope face. So now we understand what is the angle of the slope, right? What is the orientation of the slope? We all understand that what will be its depth, what will be the strike of that plane. So we know the characteristics of a plane. We can also get the characteristics of the intersection line from that, right? Because we are seeing the intersection line. But by these two also, we can actually interpolate and find out what will be the characteristics of that plane, of joint plane that is there. So we also need to understand how we plot this line and the interaction with a plane. So that we'll see how when we start the plotting part, how these things come up. So, yeah, so strike, as we were saying, the strike and true dip are sufficient to represent a point or a line, because just the two angles basically define how the line will be. Why strike in the plane and not the dip angle? Because dip angle can be dip angle, we are already saying that it can be defined by a strike as 90° plus with respect to the strike angle, right? So that in that terms, generally when we go for a geological survey, we are more aware of the strike because of the outcropping nature of these joints rather than the true dip direction. That is not that apparent when we go for a geological survey. So in geological survey, these are the data that are available. So when we see a plane mapping, we see it outcrop sometimes, and we see how it is moving with respect to in the horizontal plane, maybe some at a certain angle with respect to north. So that's where the importance of a strike comes up while mapping a plane. For a line, we can't say it's a strike because the trend basically is responsible for giving it the direction with respect to north, and plunge and dip are almost similar to that. So when we talk about a line or a plane and we quantify those in terms of their orientation, we generally follow a convention that the strike angle, which can vary from with respect to north, it can vary from 0°, right, to a total of 360 degrees. So that ways it can have any value from 0 to 360, right? So however, the dip angle or the plunge angle can, in general sense, if we don't see complete sense, it can have the maximum value of 90° if it is a vertical plane. Uh, it can go backside also, but then we go from the east side measurement or the opposite side measurement. So That's why since these values go from 0 to 90 and these values go from 0 to 360, we generally go for a representative convention in form of 3 digits for the strike direction or the trend direction and 2 digits for the dip direction or the plunge direction. So in that way, when if a plane is represented, suppose 120 oblique 70, so it is clearly saying that the strike of that plane is 120 degree and the dip of that plane will be 70 degree, and we won't be able confusing that. If it is less than 100, so generally it is written in terms of 080 or something like that. So basically convention of 3 digits for the strike angle or the angle with respect to north, and 2 digits for the dip is taken. And that will help us later on when we start plotting also. So that will be understandable how it is. Okay. Let's move ahead. Any questions till now? Anyone has any doubts? This is clear, right? Okay. So what is stereographic analysis? We now start the plotting part or the mapping part of these. Stereographic analysis basically is a 2D visualization of a 3D plane. So you see on the left side, on the right side, you see a hollow sphere that can be considered as a reference sphere. Now, if there is a plane that basically intersects with this sphere, a certain intersection arc will be made, right? When it intersects with the hollow sphere. That is correct. The arc that can be made will be in on that outer edge of this, right? And this arc, when projected on the horizontal surface, can be actually represented by an arc on the top like this. So this is the projection. This arc, a simple arc, or which is called great circle, which we will also see, a circular arc that actually is representing a full plane. And this is how a stereographic projection is made for a plane, right? So lines are basically representing a plane. That means a single two-dimensional figure of a line, or in this sense, an arc is representing a plane. And actually, each line actually can be represented just by a dot. So you see this line. This is a line here. If we have a plunge and a trend, उसका line को plot करते हैं जब, if we plot a line in a normal sense, wherever it interacts or touches this reference sphere, if that point is plotted on the horizontal surface, this is called a plot of a line. So the plot of a line is reduced to just a point now. So basically what we are seeing is three-dimensional figure is changing into a two-dimensional figure that was a line is changing into a one direction. So reduction of one dimension is there. So why I am writing a pole will be clear here a little bit ahead. The only limitation for this kind of analysis, as we were saying, the analysis that we are doing right now is basically representing the orientations of different joints with respect to each other. So orientation or angle is only judged. The physical proximity is not judged. So how closely they are spaced, or how persistent the joint is, or other properties of the joint that we discussed, these are not considered in this stereographic projection. So the whole purpose of stereographic projection is to basically map the joint in terms of its orientation, or any plane for that sense. Even we can map a plane for the slope plane, right? This is how the slope slope is oriented. So we can plot it here. Now, how do we do it? That we will be studying ahead. The whole concept is all the all the planes or a line basically passes through the center. And in the case of the plane, the first strike passes through the center of this reference sphere, and it is oriented as per its dip and the direction of the dip, right? And based on the projection, we basically have a single line that represents its interaction with this hemisphere. Now there is something called a pole of a plane. Now pole of a plane is any one line. Uh, Pole of a plane is a line that is at a 90-degree angle to this plane surface. So a line that can be can be considered as a normal reaction force that when we say, right, for a plane. So a normal to the plane is representing a pole of a plane, and that becomes a line. And when that line interacts with the hollow sphere, that gives the pole position. So that in this way, actually, we can represent all the planes even as a single point, because now we are converting a plane into a single, representing a plane by a pole, and the pole is represented by a single point. So this kind of representation, where it is useful is, suppose we go to a field, and when we visit suppose a slope or any natural feature, and we say we see suppose 500 or 600 joints that are there distributed throughout the rock. What geologists do is basically structural geologists map each and every joint there. So what is its orientation? What is its strike direction? What is its true dip? And all the parameters are apart from that as well. To keep a log of that and to see its relative positions and how they are oriented in that region, they basically plot these stereographic type of nets. So when we basically take the horizontal projection, we have something like this. So a stereographic projection for that plane that we were seeing in a 3 dimension will actually be just a single arc. And for a pole, that will be a single point. So if these guys can represent all the planes by just its lines or the arcs, and all the lines or even poles by the single point, they can actually represent a lot of data in just a small amount of space in this sense. And that what that gives, basically that gives the prevalence of what kind of orientation joints have. Let us suppose if this is the stereographic projection, right? And I have like so many points in this area, right? Or that represent maybe so many joint planes or so many joints that are there. So I will have an idea. Okay, in this region, the poles are mostly scattered in this region. So that means the orientation of the joint planes will be supposedly very similar or very closer to this kind of planes. So what we get from this kind of analysis in a geological field survey is the overall direction of the joints. So joints, how they are oriented, and what's a dominant orientation of that joint plane or the joint set. Why it is important? When we plan the slopes from that zone. Suppose we are planning a mining operation where we have to plan the benches. So which direction it should be, how what will be the angle of the benches, right? So if we know the direct orientation of the joint sets that are there in that rock, basically we can decide what can be the what can be the face slope angle or the face angle of the benches, suppose. So if these are basically oriented towards the faces, we can design the slope so that the face can be either too high or too low as compared to the joint, so that planar failure should not happen. Or if there are multiple set of joints that are forming wedges, right? So that time also we can design our slope in such a way that those wedges do not interact with the slope face. In that way, at least that will be those kind of predicted slope failures can be avoided. So these kind of surveys that are done basically gives a good idea of the joints orientation, the sum of all the discontinuities that can be plotted based on their orientations, and give us a good idea of overall region how it is behaving, right? Uh, Again, there, as we read before, there are limitations including that other properties of these discontinuities are not given. So something like we can't just based on this we can say that so many things are oriented in that direction, so this kind of failure will happen. So can happen, yes, the failure can happen. Probability is there, and we can take measures to basically reduce that probability. That's all we can do till that time, right? Other because for certainty of the failure, we have to see other parameters like, as we said, the persistence or the joint roughness, cohesion, friction, and so on. Correct. So when we see how we decide a plane can be projected. So when we see and mark its strike with respect to north, right? Or we see the dip direction here, and we choose the dip direction and go to the dip. So that is what is represented here in 3 dimension. Correct. I understand it is confusing, but I will show you some more things and how to do it, and it will be much clearer in that sense. So let's move ahead and we'll see. So this projection that you are seeing, the stereographic projection, is basically a projection of this whole reference sphere on a 2-dimensional base. So if you see this sphere, the reference sphere, it can be actually projected in 2 ways. This is an equatorial projection where the equator is at the center, right? And this is the polar projection you see on the base. So on the basis of that, we can have actually 2 kinds of projections on which we can plot our data. The equatorial projection can be also be of 2 or more types. This one here says a equal area projection. Equal area projection, basically what it means is if suppose I have a circle on here, right? And on the surface of this reference sphere, right? And its area is suppose A or A1, right? If I project this area into the equatorial projection, this area will be actually be distorted a little bit, right? Because it's based on what is my perspective of seeing. If my perspective is somewhere here, it will basically form a cone sort of way, right? If my perspective is here, and if I'm seeing from this point, so whatever area it is, it will be basically enlarged here, and it will show a different area, even though representing the same thing. Correct. So this kind of when this kind of representation is there, like what I plotted, it's basically conserving the angle of the projection. So if this is 20 degrees, this also will actually be 20 degrees, but the area is being changed. So this kind of projection, when perspective is like that, so the lines that are made, the projections that are made are called equal angle projections. However, the lines actually can be adjusted in order to make this an equal area projection. So this one that you are seeing is actually an equal area projection. So equal area projection is good in the sense that if you say this is the north, this is the south, in that sense we can actually divide it into a 360-degree full circle, and the basis of dips can be counted from east and west direction both. So from east, if this is the 0 degree, these can be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and so on till 90. So what this circle basically represents is this, this arc basically represents, it represents a plane that has its strike in the north-south direction, right? And that is cutting or intersecting the hypothetical reference sphere at this point of projection, right? So 20-degree projection basically represents here. So 20-degree dip angle, quite flat, would have been represented here. In a polar coordinate, what happens is polar charts, we actually do not plot three-dimensional figures. We just plot two-dimension objects like line. So to plot a line, it becomes simpler if we have the trend. The suppose in 120-degree trend. So this is 100. This is 110. It is 120. So we have 120, and the dip also or the plunge can be counted from similar to the equatorial part. Similar to equatorial, we can plot here. So it is 0 yahan pe. This will be 10 and 20 and so on. So if we want to plot a 110 and 30 degrees, so that will be, the line will basically be somewhere around represented by this point. So this point represented line basically means if you see in this perspective, it will fall somewhere around here, right? This point will be the equatorial projection. So it will be the line will be somewhere around this point on the actual reference frame. So it will be more clear when we show some three-dimensional work. So just to understand how what things are and what can be represented, these are just demonstrated here. Okay. Actual stereo net. So this was how a stereo net plotting can be done. Actual stereo nets, where plotting is done, look something like this. So each of these stereo nets are actual stereo nets that geologists work on. So you see there are many more divisions that are done. So each of these divisions represent some strike angle or some dip angle. If you say about the equatorial projection from north, if this is north and this is south, so the 0 degree starts from here, then this is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, right? 60, 70, 80, and 90. So 90 is here, there can be east, and so on like that. So 90, after 90, 10, 100, and so on till 360. So this whole outer side represents a strike. And if we want to see how the dipping is done, so dip angles are basically calculated inside. So once we have the strike, we basically want the strike to pass through the center, right? And the dip of that plane will be represented by these curves. So a curve that is a plane that is dipping at suppose 20 degree or 30 degree will be will be counted from here. So 0, this will be 10, this will be 20, and so on. So a plane that will be dipping towards towards 40 degree towards the base or something from the horizontal will be represented by this this arc, right? And it is similarly done for all the type of planes. Now the question is here you might be wondering, if this is done, then there are only like so many 180 planes that can be there. But actually what happens is this this plane basically represents a plane that has a strike of in north-south direction. If we want to plot something that has a strike at other angles, we will have to rotate our stereo net. And how we do that, that will be seen. In the polar coordinate system, again, as I was explaining last time, it's easy to plot anything like the trend and the plunge can be easily seen and plotted. So these kind of graphs are also important when we try to plot multiple poles or multiple lines together to understand what are their interactions and so on. We'll be seeing these, how these are plotted also, if possible today. So just to give you an example of how the things are plotted. So step by step, actually, there are some videos I would suggest you to watch it to see how the actual plotting is done, because we are not that much concerned about the plotting part, because anyways that we won't be required to do. But we have to know how things are and how things work. The main thing that we want to understand is what these data represents. If a stereo net or a stereographic projection is presented toward in front of you, you have to understand, okay, this is the data that it is representing. If an arc is there or a point is there, what kind of data it says it is, and so on. Okay. So still, how to draw the stereo net and how to represent those, I would suggest some videos that you all can watch, and we'll also discuss that later on. But just to give you an idea how things are done. So firstly, this was the stereo net that we saw, right? Just ignore the markings that are there, that is done for some previous explanation. These screenshots are from a video that I will reference later. So if you see this stereo net, this stereo net is basically kept here, and a tracing paper is kept over it. So a tracing paper is placed over it. This is called an overlay, because why we are keeping a tracing paper? Because we might have to rotate this whole tracing paper in order to bring our strike with respect to the north-south direction, right? Because every time our plane of orientation will not have the strike of north-south direction, it will have different strikes. So how do we do that? We will see. So first of all, keep a tracing paper here, mark the boundaries, and basically, because we have to rotate it along the center, we can actually use a pin both of them can be coupled in between. So in the center, there is a pin is inserted. So the stereo net is below, tracing paper is above, and a pin is inserted so that the tracing paper and the movement is restricted in just the rotation phase, not it doesn't go anywhere else. Then all the markings are done, like the equatorial circle boundary is done and the north, south, east, west are marked. Now, when we want to mark a strike angle, for marking the strike angle, all the strike angle are marked clockwise. So if in the previous one we saw this is north, right? So if we want to plot a 30-degree strike angle of 30-degree, we have to start counting from here and go down, right? So suppose we have a plane of 30-degree strike and 70-degree dip. So for 30-degree strike, we will start from here. That is 10, 20, and 30. We will mark a point here. So similarly, they have done, not on the stereo net, on the tracing paper. We will mark there, and then rotate the tracing paper to bring this point on the north side of the stereo net. So that's what they have done till now. Just wanted to clarify what they have done. So they have basically marked the 30-degree and brought the north of the tracing paper to here, so that the 30-degree point of this example basically reaches the north side. What effectively we are doing is, we are marking the strike direction and bringing the strike direction in the direction of north-south of the stereo net. Why we are doing that? Because all the original orientations of the plane are in the stereo net, they are oriented with respect to the north-south direction only. So once we get the strike angle, we mark the strike angle and bring that strike angle so that it faces the north side. So that way is our plane is basically again oriented in the north-south direction. Now we can actually mark the dip of the plane. So dip of the plane, for marking the dip of the plane, we basically count, like I said, from east-west direction from 0 to 90. So now for this example, we are plotting a plane 03070. So 030 was the strike. So we have already marked the strike. We have rotated, right? And now we are counting from outside and drawing the 70-degree point. So we have counted from outside 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70. So 70 is here. And that's what they are doing. They are basically drawing the this arc, and that's the plane that is represented by it. Uh, it's a fun thing to do. It's not that difficult thing. Just we need some tracing paper, some pencil, and a stereo net that will be available to us. But we can have something better. And as I say, why to do it the old way when you can do in a better way? So let me show you one method of doing it that can be done digitally as well. So hold on. Okay. What I want to show you is a very simple way uh, to draw these stereo nets. This website is called, this tool is called Visible Geology, stereo net app. So basically this stereo net is already available with us. And what we can do is we can either plot a plane or a line, and we can see it in 2-dimension as well as 3-dimension and how that we are doing. So let's try this. We have this stereo net, and if you hover your cursor over the stereo net, you will see the line and the plane actually can the location of that can be seen being represented on that stereo net, right? What we can do is by single click we can make a line, by double click make a plane. Let's make a plane that we were seeing from the 30-degree strike and 70-degree dip. So for now what we do is we just make a plane for the sake of it. So just double click it, and this basically represents a plane, right? And the representation is in form of arc. We can actually edit this and change the strike and the dip. So I want a strike of how was it, 70 degrees, right? So I can change the strike to 70 degrees, and I can change, oh sorry, a strike of 30 degrees and change the dip to 70 degrees. I have the color red, let it be red. So that's it. Line width, I can change the line width if we want a wider, maybe 2.5, a thicker line. 3D fill opacity is okay, let's accept. So this is the plane that we were trying to build that time, right? If you see this point, the north point is 30 degree from the north, right? 0, 1, 2, 10, 20, 30. This is the strike direction, and this full curve actually represents a plane that we want to plot. Now, how to see this? Just click here and see rotate it. You can see actually what we plotted is a plane, and that is what is represented by what we plotted in the 2D. So this is called a stereo net or a stereograph projection. This was the plane we wanted to plot. It is inclined. It has a strike of 30 degree with respect to north, right? Because north is there. This is the strike line, and it is oriented at 30 degree from the north. And the dipping is at 70 degree with respect to horizontal. So we can see how it is dipping as if we see this side. Yes, so 70 degree we can see quite clearly. And that is easy to represent by even in the 2-dimensional visualization. Now, we also talked about a pole, right? So pole basically is a 90 degree line to that plane. And that is also represented here in form of that line where it touches it is basically a projection on that part. So both a pole and a plane can easily be plotted with this tool. We can even add more planes. So let's plot another plane, suppose here. And what are its properties? It has 142, so let's keep it 140. And 60 degrees dip, right? Again 2 and accept. So even though now you see these two planes are plotted in this stereographic net, right? And the point of interaction between these two basically represents a line which is made by the cross section or the interaction of this. So intersection of these two planes will represent a line, and that line is represented by this dot. So if you see in 3 dimension also, this is something how the two planes are interacting, right? And where this interaction line is joining on the surface of this hollow sphere, right? In this point, this is actually projected in form of the intersection point here. So just by the two curves, we can actually see what is the intersection point of these two lines as well, these two planes as well. And if we just want to see, we can actually make a line at this point. Let's orient it in 2-dimensional. Oops. And just single click to make a line here. And it makes a line here. And I want to basically see only the line and hide these. So this can actually give me a representative line that will be found by the interaction of these two planes, right? So these all things we can do. What is necessity of representing a pole? So pole, Rohan asks why we represent a pole. Pole is basically a good representation of a plane. It is not necessary, but it is an additional information they are giving here. Pole, by just representing the pole, we can actually represent a plane, as I said, because it is not necessary for me to draw all this plane. If I say this point is a pole of a plane will actually represent a single plane full in its full extent, because based on the location of this pole, I can actually know what will be the inclination of this plane as well, and what will be the dip direction or the strike direction also. So the beauty of the pole is just a single point represents a whole plane. The challenge of the pole is if we want to visualize, it is hard to visualize a plane out of a single pole. But because when we plot in geological surveys so many planes, it is easier to do that just by points rather than so many planes directly plotting in that. So even in this 2D projection, it will be a real hodgepodge if I plot so many planes, but it may be a little bit more sensible if I plot so many dots, right? And those dots will basically give me an idea of how the planes are distributed. So that's the beauty of pole of a plane. So pole of a plane can represent a plane itself, but it's sometimes hard to visualize, and that's the challenge. Did that answer, Rohan? Why we do plane, right? Now, if we have, suppose, how much time we have? Okay, 1 minute. If we have a slope angle that that may be interacting with these joints in certain direction. Suppose I have added this plane, and why is this color so bright? Let's change the color to blue. Okay. So the blue color represents our actual slope, right? And the red and the green are the two joint sets. Now, if you see, actually, this is the wedge that is forming here, right? the wedge is actually exposed to the plane here. So this kind of failure can actually happen when we do these kind of analysis. We can actually predict what kind of possible failures can happen. Can it be a wedge or a block failure? Can it be just a planar failure? So in this, you see how the two planes are interacting and it is exposed to the surface of the slope. So in that way, we can actually predict that this whole wedge can actually fail quite easily. And just by these projections, we can find out the area of that wedge as well as the extent to which it can fail and so on. So these kind of projections are very useful. And when we do, I think next class, we will do some kinematic analysis. So kinematic analysis, we will do the actual quantification of the area of failure or the block size, and also the type of failures that we can predict from these stereographic analysis. So do check this out. I will share this in the chat, the link here. So do check this out. This is a useful tool that basically substitutes the hard work of taking a tracing paper and doing it on the with hand, and that exercise is good. That is good to learn. But if we can do here, we know the concepts. I think this is much better. Okay, so we'll close the class here. I think we overshoot by 2 minutes. And if you have any questions, you can ask right now, or we can take the questions in Monday also. And do check this out. Okay, I'll also send you the links in the mail about some lectures about how the stereo nets work, what is the concept behind, and how do the geologists plot it. It's from one of the professors in IIT Bombay. So I think he has done a good work. He's quite a old professor there. So I think these are videos from NPTEL or some related institution. So I will share those. Just have a look whenever you have time how he has plotted. He has basically explained different types of stereo nets and different types of discontinuities, how you represent those and how you plot those there. So that will be a useful exercise. Do check that out. I will send you the links. And if any questions are there, we'll have a discussion. And on Monday, we'll be moving on to a further analysis that will be directly useful to the slope stability part. That will be the kinematic analysis. So do come prepared. Any questions are there? You have right now it is late, but yeah, please. If any questions are there here, or then we will close the class. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone for being present. I hope it is interesting. When we do more stuff and find out what kind of slope failures are there, it will be more interesting.